So today I'm going to talk a little bit about nostalgia. Um, I'm going to what kicked this off is my ex. She she hasn't we haven't talked in months or whatever, and she's living her own life. It's everything is complete. I'm doing the thing I'm supposed to do, and she did everything that she's supposed to do, and all that other stuff, and so she can do whatever she wants. But we had joint accounts for 2 decades, and I guess there's still some stuff that is linked to my email address on her side, and it forwarded me information that the mailing address had changed, and so I was, of course, concerned that someone was hacking my account. So I looked, but it's her old address from here, and she updated it to be in Tamuning, Guam, which is where she's from. It's where she was born, and I get it. I do get it. She moved away from there when she was a kid, and when she talked about that place, she always talked about it in terms of it just being a simpler time and a simpler life, and just running around with almost nothing on, playing in the water, playing in the woods and stuff like that. And so I know why she went back. We never went there. That's one thing I kind of regret, is that we never did that, as when we were together. But it's a hell of a flight. It's expensive. It's long. And whatever. It just never happened. We did go to Hawaii, where a bunch of her family ended up, and that was pretty. That's a really nice place. Expensive as hell though. Guam apparently is a little rougher around the edges. Everything I've heard about that place, but in terms of like the plant life and the animal life, they're a little more savage and poisonous or whatever. But still an island, and she's, arguably Micronesia is what it is, but they consider themselves kind of Polynesian, the Chamorro people. Um, but they're not Filipino. Make sure you make that distinction. It's a funny thing, man. It's Islanders and Filipinos. There's just this strange animosity that I don't quite understand, but whatever. It's something I knew before I met her too. Is because I grew up around a lot of Islanders and Filipinos and stuff. There's just this weird bad blood that I don't get. But anyway, uh, it got me to thinking about nostalgia. Like I want to go back to where I grew up, and I would do that from time to time, even when I was living in Seattle. I grew up in an area called White Center, which historically was a red light district for a naval base that was in Seattle. When there's a little naval base down there, I guess, that got moved out to Bremerton years later or whatever. I'm not sure exactly the history. This was World War One, around that era, but it was where you would go when you wanted to do illicit activities. And it had a colloquial name, even was Rat City, and it's not because of the animal; it's because that place was known for having people that would snitch you out, that would rat you out. Which is pretty funny because I heard it. My mother would say this. My mother. This is the kind of lessons that she would give, but I heard it from other people. It was this weird cultural thing that percolated up over the decades. Nobody likes a snitch. Nobody likes a snitch. Not do the right thing or whatever. It's nobody likes a snitch. Don't you rat. Don't you rat. So that was kind of the weird little cultural thing, but it was a very poor area, very poor area. It was so poor that it was a target of a special, I don't know if Superfund is the right word, but it's the federal government. In fact, I think it was the Clinton administration directly was finding these targeted, like, zip codes or whatever, where they're like, oh my God, the crime rate is so crazy here. It's an acute problem in this one little area that is out of control. Let's put a bunch of money in there and try to sort things out, right? Well, the reason for that, the crime rate, is because it was historically poor, first of all, and there were the part of that military stuff was that there was a huge set of projects that were built there, on federal land, or maybe it was state land or whatever. These huge projects that were built for military after World War II, these little duplexes, but they became low income housing, and there were a lot of refugees from Vietnam and Cambodia in particular there, but there were, it was a whole smattering of other disadvantaged people or whatever. But these refugees were a really interesting thing growing up. Uh, so I'm aware of what happened in Southeast Asia better than most people with this skin color, because I grew up around those people that had been betrayed. I'm just going to say it out loud. They were betrayed by the United States government. They were fed a bill of goods by us, and they lost everything. And we were like, well, oh, our bad. Well, if you can get on this boat on our way out, you can get on. Otherwise, good luck to you. That the image of all those people on the roof of the U.S. embassy as that helicopter leaves. All those people that were getting left behind. A lot of them were, wives and collaborators and all these other people that just we didn't care about. We left those people back behind, and they just got slaughtered. Same thing happened in Afghanistan. I'm sure that's what it looked like. As anybody who was helping us, we just left them to their fate. It's awful. It's just awful. But that's not the only part of it. Um, because first of all, we were involved in Cambodia. We don't really publicly admit that, but we were crossing the border and blowing people up over there and everything else. We had collaborators and stuff from over there, and so that's why you had refugees from Cambodia as well. And the thing about Cambodia in those days, if there ever was a crusade, whenever we talk about bringing freedom and democracy to a place, the Khmer Rouge. If you ever look into Pol Pot and the killing fields, that it just, uh, uh, and I knew survivors of that. My friend Toom, who was my age, that stuff all went down in like the late 70s, 78, 79, whatever. Um, and the Khmer Rouge had this just incredible zealotry to the way they viewed what they were going to do. A lot of that stuff, the communist reforms and stuff, they were about land reform. It's about, hey, we got this upper class of people that are taking all the stuff from the lower class, from the, from whatever, the peasants and stuff. But even among the peasants, they viewed that there were people who were like basically any, if you weren't like a straight up serf, slaving away at the land for the greater good of the country, you were targeted. And like they went after intellectuals, anybody who'd been educated, anybody who'd gone to school, they would kill them because of that, for that reason. If you had glasses, if you wore glasses, you were an intellectual and you would die. And if you helped those people, if you protected them, they'd slaughter the entire village. They would kill everyone. They just come in and just murder. So many people were getting killed by that guy. And meanwhile, we're next door blowing up Viet Cong, who arguably, they're communists or whatever, but they're, when you really look at it, they're trying to protect their home from this imperialist, napalming crazy overseas empire that is trying to, I guess, originally trying to pry it loose for France, who lost control of it because of World War II. They were like, hey, we're independent, we're going to do our own thing, and we're like, no, we're going to give you back to France. I guess that was the thought, or whatever. And the false flag that's kicked that off, and everything about Vietnam is just awful from our from what we did, from our involvement. To, do your own research, but it's not pretty. It's really not pretty. And we were brutal, brutal, brutal to those people. They hated us for good reason. But in Cambodia, um, people would flee from the Khmer Rouge. They were just trying to get out of there, and it's all jungle and stuff. These are poor, poor people, and they would hike to try to get to Thailand. They couldn't go to Vietnam, so they try to get to Thailand. Well, at the Thai border, they would only let you cross with one child. If you had more children, you had to stay on the other side of the border. You can only bring one with you. Parents had to make that choice if they wanted to survive. They leave their children, their oldest kid, behind, or whatever. And who knows what happens? It's terrible. This is recent. This is living memory for some people. And my friend Toom, he told me, his family told me, when that they encountered that, they had two kids. They had Toom, and they had his older brother, who was like 5 or something. Um, and so they couldn't hide him. So they put Toom in a backpack and stuffed him under blankets and hoped he wouldn't cry. And he did not cry. So they got across the border into Thailand and got over here because there was some sort of refugee service for collaborating Cambodians who weren't collaborating with us, but they were collaborating with us. There was some sort of thing that they could come over here. And where I grew up, the part of the reason the crime rate was so high there when I was growing up is because there was a huge projects, right? That had been built back after the wake of World War II for returning soldiers, to have housing and stuff, and they would move out. And there's all sorts of weird little housing from the mills and stuff like that. It's just an old neighborhood. It was really built in the like 1910s, 1920s, and those projects were low income housing by the time I was a kid. And so you had a lot of these refugees there. And the thing about the refugees, okay, so, and it's not just the refugees. The refugees actually, just like any other population, it's a mixed bag. But this was the issue. So these guys who had no education, they were just collaborators. They were not literate anything. They had no skills besides farming in Asia. That was it. And they would come to the United States and then get on welfare. And I'm not dogging welfare here. This is not about that. I'm just saying that they didn't have any skills at all. And so we just plopped them in this project in this completely crazy different society that speaks a completely different language, and offered them very little except here, have some food every month or whatever, and here, have a house, and it's, that's nice, I suppose. But we didn't help integrate them at all. They had to figure it out, if they figured it out at all. And imagine going to Thailand or Cambodia, just being dropped there, and here, have a little pittance of money, go figure out your life. I mean, you're really starting from scratch. You got to learn language. You got to learn to write an entire new language and try to get along in this society. It's incredibly hard. It's this huge learning curve when you're in 30s or 40s or whatever these guys were. They'd have their family or whatever. They'd start a family, or whatever, but they had no skills, and they didn't work. And what happened, and you'd see these guys too, they would squat. They would squat and smoke cigarettes. I remember a lot of these guys would be out there smoking cigarettes, older men, just that's all they did, and sometimes talk, and sometimes play tiles or whatever. But their sons were mad as hell. All of them, they were mad as hell at their fathers, because they saw them as these useless slugs that just sat around all day and smoked cigarettes, and sometimes they were on drugs or whatever. They didn't just A lot of them just did not. They were traumatized too, almost all of them, from everything they'd gone through with the Vietnamese and Cambodian refugees. But their sons saw them as these weak men, and a lot of times they were. And the oldest son would take over, kind of based on their cultural hierarchy thing. And these guys were mean as hell, you know, beating their sisters, like, because they were, trying to control them and their families. And, there were nothing wrong with them, but it's just these oppressive, abusive people, is what they would kind of turn into. They're just filled with rage. Just filled with rage. I remember, and I'm thinking about multiple people I knew that were like this in that neighborhood I grew up with, and anybody who lived around that area, part of that culture, knows what I'm talking about. Wasn't everyone, of course. My friend Toom, who was the younger brother, so he didn't feel that weird cultural responsibility of being the man of the house, is basically what it was. He was a gentle soul. I loved him. He was a good friend. And his dad actually had his act together. And so even though his older brother was still kind of feisty, um, he could have respect for his father, because his father basically was just, he had actually started climbing that leg up, but his father was a janitor. And so there wasn't a lot of respect for that either. You work with trash and stuff. It's weird. It's a weird dynamic. Um, but he made enough money. He learned how to read English. He spoke, very broken but functional English, and he eventually got out of the projects. And that didn't happen. That just didn't happen that often. We put them on hard mode and left them to their fate here too. And when you think about Vietnam, you know, the iconic scene of the United States leaving Vietnam is all those people on the top of the embassy roof as that helicopter takes off. Those were collaborators. They were wives. They were children of people. They just weren't citizens or whatever. They didn't get on the boat, and effectively, and they got left to their fate. They got left to their fate. And it probably happened in Afghanistan when we left there too. In fact, I know that it did. We saw that picture of the guy being slung from one of our helicopters. This is what happens as part of our imperial designs on the world. And what was it for? Vietnam was a chess game over a country that really meant nothing, certainly at the time. And I don't mean that slightly. I mean in terms of economic power. It was nothing worth fighting over. But because they were choosing communism as an ideology, we're like, no, and then we're like, this, I guess it's like, we got to get you back for France and perform a false flag so we can have a casus belli to attack you. It's just awful. It's look into it someday if you do. But anyway, getting back to nostalgia, a little lighter subject to some extent. This is the kind of neighborhood I grew up in, and the crime rate was high. We also had another issue was the in 92, it was 90 and 92, I think it was 92, were the riots in LA. And basically that was a turf war, and there's a large chunk of people that lost, and we had these other Asians that came up from LA. The local Asian Bloods was who settled down in our area, and that turned our neighborhood into a war zone because there were another set of guys that settled in the Seattle side of things near South High School, up in that kind of area, and they were Crips of some sort, and they would get into like straight up knife fights and stuff in the parks. It was nuts. When I think about what it was like growing up in that neighborhood, it was dangerous as hell. And we were clueless. I was a nerd, man. I remember, but I made friends. That's the only thing is I made friends. People knew who me and my friend Tom were. We were the weird white kids, that happened to be just wandering around White Center because we didn't have the presence of mind to not be out in it's these dangerous places where people are standing around defending their turf and selling drugs and stuff. I got jumped one night walking through there. There's a big park called Hicks Lake, and you cut across there to the projects. That's my friend Tom lived there, and that's a whole story for him too. But and that's nothing into that. But I was walking through there. It was dark as hell. I don't need to see these guys come out. There's probably five, six of them, and they start jumping on me, and they're just hitting me. They're just punching me, and they're gonna mug me. Is what they were gonna do. I think. I don't think, or maybe have a little fun. That's part of it too. Is they get carried away, just because it's funny. It was anyway. I'm down on the ground, and I'm like, you know me. I'm Brandon. I'm Brandon. You know me. I'm Brandon. And they all stop. They all stop. One of them because one of them was Brandon. Hold on, hold on. Brandon. I'm like, yeah, me. I'm Tom's friend. I'm Tom's friend. You know me. I have like $5 in my pocket. You want the $5? I'll give it to you, man. Whatever. You can take whatever. Just don't hurt me, man. And he's like, get out of here. I don't even know who it was. To this day, I have no idea who that was. But I invoked the idea that I was just this guy that just lived in the neighborhood and never caused anybody any trouble, and they let me go. That was my only defense. Was like, man, I'm harmless. I want to. I play card games and stuff with you and joke around. And I'm just a dude. I'm as poor as you. But the crime rate was so acute in our little neighborhood. I guess it was the zip code or whatever that they were going after. The federal government, I think it was even the Clinton administration itself, directed funds. They were doing this thing where they were looking for places with really high crime rates, really spiked crime rates. Um, and ours was like that. Was one that where it's like, here's the general crime rate of Seattle, and you have like the poor neighborhoods and stuff, and then White Center's like, whoa, and so they're like, what can we do about that? That's one we could kind of snip off, and lower our peaks, and our statistics, because that's all we are to the government is a statistic. And they sent dare trucks and stuff, it's like good, yeah, good luck with that. But I have fond memories of this place. And where I grew up, the part where my grandparents settled was on the other side of this road called Ambom. So it wasn't so bad because you could see the water. Any place in Seattle where you could see the water was a nice neighborhood, or at least decent. It's relatively safe because it was just people who were wealthier and people demanded police presence and all that other stuff. So you were more okay there. But the elementary school was kind of rough. Some of the kids were mean as hell. I'd be running home from some guy that's chasing me on his bike or whatever. That stuff happened enough. But the high school and the middle school were on the other side of this street called Ambom, where you can't see the water over there. And it's the same with Rainier Beach. Rainier Beach is another poor area of, it's where Sir Mix-a-Lot is from, that area, where it's named for the beach that's on Lake Washington. And you can see and on that side, if you're up on the hill and you go down, those are nice houses and it's a decent area. But similar houses, nice houses on the other side of this hill coming down, and they have bullet holes and stuff in them. It's like gang warfare going down there. And that area, I lived in there briefly when I was a teenager, when my mom moved down there with her boyfriend. And I was afraid to walk down the street during the day. I was only really felt safe because I was on a cul-de-sac of these Korean families where they had these matriarchs in these Korean families, and they'd have like 20 or 30 people living in these houses, like these 4 or 5 bedroom houses. They were big houses, but they had a night shift crew going on thing. It was like an operation because that's how they had to live. That's how they had to survive where they come from. And they bring that lifestyle here, and they were very successful. On the Sunday, they all stayed home on Sundays for whatever reason. They had their schedules around that, and the street would be lined with nice cars. I don't know where everybody slept, but the cars were nice. But living on that cul-de-sac, you had kind of little enforcers. Anybody that they didn't like come down the street, and they very politely but very aggressively, like, you do not hang out down here. This is not your area now. So I had that kind of stuff going on in this town that I grew up in. And it's funny because I talk about this stuff to people who are from New York or from New Jersey or whatever, and I tell them, yeah, I grew up in a rough area of Seattle, and they laugh. They think, ha 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 ha, you know you don't know what a rough neighborhood is. And maybe I don't, but it was pretty rough, I think. I knew one kid who got shot and killed because he said something wrong to some dude at a party, and that guy chased him down when he was at another party at Lincoln Park, and he just shot him. And he was a kid that I knew in high school, and that's the kind of senselessness. I knew one kid who was actually my mom's boyfriend at one point, nephew, who got curb stomped, put into a coma for days because he just looked at somebody the wrong way. I saw one guy I knew, and I didn't get involved. That's one of my great regrets. I was afraid of this guy, Jesse King. He was a huge son of a bitch. Him and his toady were beating the shit out of this kid, Jason Hartle. I remember these names. And Hartle was always causing trouble as it was. So I think really where we all thought about that was like, well, he probably mouthed off to this guy that he should have known better to do, but it was a very lopsided thing, and I regret not getting involved in that. But it is what it is. Stuff like that was going on all the time. So, first of all, as it is as a human being, you tend to compartmentalize and push away the bad, and then you draw out and stretch out and romanticize the good about your past. And a lot of the stuff that I remember when I think about it, the things that I felt, I feel good about. I think about, we had a fairly big yard, and we could see the water from where I lived, and we had these massive cherry trees. And one of my best memories, my favorite memory, is a summer day, and I clambered up way higher than I should have in this tree. I was 11 or something, and it had two branches that were out like this from the main stem, or whatever you would say, is the top of that tree. And I was hanging on that tree, and my legs were I was straddling that tree. I was holding on. I could see the water, and I was swaying in the breeze in that summer day. Oh God, just thinking about it, just it was the most beautiful thing. And then when I tried to do it again later, a few months later, I was too big. I'd grown that much. It was a few months, I guess, or whatever. When I went back out there to try it again, I couldn't get up there. It was too dangerous. It was already too dangerous, but I made it beforehand. But different, hanging out at the park, and or there'd be violence that you would see, or crazy stuff that you would see. There's always something. My friend Tom, who lived in the project, we used to say that we'd sit on his breezeway, and it was like basically watching a movie, except the scene stayed the same and the players would always change. You'd see, one time there were these kids, the Lemley brothers. They all looked the same. There were 5 of these kids, and their mom was just knocking them out one after the other or whatever. And they always were these skinny kids, and they were always getting into trouble with other kids. They were always getting in trouble. And we're sitting on the breezeway. It was in the afternoon or whatever. We're just talking, and we see Josh Lemley. And then this whole crowd of guys, oh, chasing after him, just laughing. Run, Josh, run. One time, we went, me and my friend Tom again, we were crossing the street from going to the grocery store. We were getting food or whatever, and we're across the street, and Tom would do this thing. He was a bigger boy, and he would do the truffle shuffle like in Goonies, and he does this to this car that, in the street, and he ha 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 ha, and he starts walking across the street. Well, that car starts accelerating. We hear it, so then we get across the street. We're like, okay, this guy's getting kind of freaked out or whatever. This guy hit his e-brake because I don't know if he was going to pop out of the car or what. He thought that Tom was like punking him, and he was in this really nice lowrider car. It was a red car. That's a bad thing to see, man. If you piss those guys off, this lowrider tinted window red car, and he hit his e-brake and hit it, and he slammed into this telephone pole. And I will never forget what Tom said next. Fucking run. We hauled ass, and these projects were carved into the side of the hill, right? So this hill was crazy steep. We were we somehow or another, we both kept our feet underneath us as we are running down this hill. We run and we hide in his breezeway because they didn't know who we were, and he didn't know where we lived, but they knew that we'd run in there, and we heard him driving around looking for us. We were and the reason we were in the breezeway is because his dad wasn't home and Tom didn't have his keys, and so we were locked outside. We couldn't get indoors. Oh God, just thinking about the fear that we felt from that, because that could have ended very badly for us. But that's it, though. That's, people had no sense of humor and stuff like that. But I think about it now and I laugh. It's so funny. It's one of my better memories, even though I might have gotten a cap in my ass that night. Uh, but uh, but we remember the good stuff. We remember the good stuff and don't think about the bad. And if we were in danger, we romanticize the danger and all these other things. All these things that I went through, pretty close calls, some of them, were. I look back now as part of my formative years, and with fondness a lot of the time. And I would say this about it is that as all I wanted to do as I gotten older is I want to get out of here. I want to get out of these places. I want to live somewhere safe. I want to live somewhere where I don't feel like, I don't know if, walking down the street is even a good idea. That I want to not have the chaos in my life. That was a big goal of mine, leaving home, was that my home life was so unstable. I never knew what was going to happen in terms of, like, if I could get food or clothes or whatever. And a lot of times I was kind of living at other people's houses and stuff, just kind of living on their under their roof because it was safer. Because my mom was just all over the place, especially after the ex left, her ex left, and uh, which is not a great way to live in the first place. And there wouldn't be power sometimes, or there wouldn't be a phone sometimes, or she wouldn't be home for days at a time because she'd be hanging out somewhere else and all that other stuff. And um, so when I moved out and got my own place and got out of those neighborhoods and it was safe, I felt really happy about that. And it's so funny. And it's like, now that I live this great life, now it's boring. I miss the adventure of it to some extent. I miss those crazy characters and the wildness and the because it created a lot of stories. There was a lot of things to talk about in a place like that, and there are way less stories once I moved to suburbia, the exurbs of Seattle, on the fringes of King County, in Issaquah and Sammamish and stuff, way out in places that were cow towns when I was a kid, but they were safe. And every now and again, I go driving back through the old neighborhood, and it was worse than I remember. Every time I would go through there, it was worse than I remember, and there was nothing to romanticize. It was, you'd go through and they're like, oh, there's the Burning Boy. Wow, that the Burning Boys was a grocery store, and it's like, wow, this place is a dump, and these projects are scary, and these streets are torn up, and these people all around are, they're more central areas of town that are all people hanging out. I don't want to park my car here. I don't want to get out of the car here. There's no reason for me to get out of here. I really don't even want to get gas here. So there's a, a maturity and an understanding, especially as I became more worldly, I guess you would say, that made me realize just how bad that place was. And I'm kind of wondering what my ex is thinking right now. Is where I go with that. Is I think, I wonder if she got there and she probably felt the breeze and felt the island and stuff, because she's always been a tropical girl, and she did not like the United States. She moved here when she was 14 or something like that. Her father was a banker that got annihilated in the savings and loan scandal. He never recovered from that. And when we were going through stuff, I would find, like, letter. He was a very proud man. He is a very proud man. I think he's still alive, obviously. But he would say things like, she wanted to get assistance or whatever, or student loan or something, and they wouldn't give it to her because of her family's income. And her father had to write this letter that was totally eating crow. That was like, I have been out of work for a long time, and the numbers you're looking at are not relevant to me anymore, kind of thing. And that had to have been hard. And she was made fun of in the area that she was in. She said that what would happen. She has the last name Martinez because she's Chamorro. She's from the Spaniards conquered quite a lot, and they spread their names around quite a lot. But around where she was living in California, in this white neighborhood, upper class neighborhood where everyone was white, they would be like, "Oh, you're a dirty Mexican," And she's like, "What are you talking about?" Because she, first of all, they grew up overseas and all these other things, so she hadn't been exposed to any of the bigotry and racism that we have stateside. And she also been kind of sheltered because her father was like basically living an expatriate lifestyle. They'd be living in these compounds and stuff in Egypt, where he was a banker for a while, like Dubai and stuff. They had these really great places they lived when she was growing up. But her father said to himself, "Well, I want my kids to be educated in the United States. I want them to be educated in the United States." So he took a job back in the U.S. And he told me later that was the biggest mistake I ever made, because he ended up being just a normal dude, a VP at where he was working, and then he got laid off, and it never got better for him, and his lifestyle just collapsed. And you see this, when you put it together, he had this peak that he made right around when he was 45, 46, and then everything went downhill from there. It's kind of sounds familiar when I think about that. But anyway, he when the kids got here, it just everything fell apart after a couple of years. And Tara's never, she was happier, I guess you would say, in California, but she was broke. And then she moved to Washington because her family moved away from there, and they ended up in Washington, and that's how she ended up in Seattle, and that's how she met me. And she hated Seattle. She hated it. She hated it was so cold all the time, and she missed the islands and missed California even. And I told her I can never move to California. First of all, because it's so damn expensive. And also too, it's just, there's no work for me. It was all Microsoft stuff that I was working on. And Silicon Valley, at least in the 90s and 2000s, there wasn't a lot of crossover. It was like, you're a Microsoft guy in the Pacific Northwest, or you're an Oracle and Linux guy in California, you're an Apple guy kind of thing. And the other places that her family lived, like Hawaii is fantastic, but it's 2/3 time zones away, and the cost of living is insane there too. The whole West Coast is insane in terms of pricing. I don't know why everything is so expensive. There's no reason for it to justify how much they're paying people. It's part of the reason why I left there. I left my hometown, and I miss it. I miss part of it, and I'm nostalgic for it too. I miss the mountains. I miss the mountains most of all, and I miss the ferries, and I miss the fir trees, and all that stuff. Um, but when I think about going back there, if I wanted to move back there, first of all, I'd have a hard time affording it, even in the fringes. I'm not talking just Seattle. I mean, talking Bellingham up near the border is expensive as hell, and places like Aberdeen and whatever, all these places that they're far away from the cities, the major cities, and it's still expensive as hell. Like, what is going on? In California, it's like you have to drive for 2 hours if you want to work anywhere that can pay you. you know, it's even worse down there. And they're like, "Why is traffic so bad?" It's because nobody can afford to live near where they work. And that's part of the reason why I came to Charlotte. Is first of all, I work remotely, so the cost of living is low. But even then, even if I had to drive uptown from where I'm living right now, it'd probably take me 20 minutes or something. I'd have to pay parking or something, but it's nothing compared to what it's like in these major cities on the West Coast. But I am nostalgic for my home. And even when I lived at home, every now and again, I would go drive to my old neighborhood and be nostalgic for that until I was reminded, oh yeah, you know. So I imagine that if I went back home, back to Seattle, and pitched a tent or whatever, I'd probably feel the same way. So you can never go home again. But I will say that at least I have some somewhat positive memories, because You know, my friend Toom, his brother, he was 5 when they left there, and he was traumatized by the stuff he saw trying to escape Cambodia with his parents. He said he remembers the rivers of blood, because the water was so red from the blood of the people they had dumped in that water. He remembered that. That is one of his earliest memories. And he's not nostalgic, to say the least. The past calls to us because we thresh out the bad stuff and we remember the good times, we remember simpler times, but we forget the hard parts. We forget how poor we were. We forget not having enough food, or not having enough to make rent, you know, having our bills sent to collections or whatever was going on with us, because things were also tough, you know. Try to carve out your own way. You know, if you lost a job, or, you know, your car broke down, or, you know, something happened to somebody you cared about, or, you know, your job was taking you across town, you didn't realize what you were signing up for, you know. Oh, it's cool. I get to work 4 10s. I get 3 days off, but I'm not. I don't get weekends off now. I don't see my friends anymore. Stuff like that. Um, and while I'm wistful about her moving away there, and I kind of wish she had told me without me finding out this way. It's not her prerogative. She doesn't have to. She doesn't have to anymore. That part is over. And what's making me even feel this way is I remember the good times that we had. I do, and I miss that part. And it's harder for me to remember why I'm here. And this is for the best, for sure. But it's it makes me think about the past, and makes me nostalgic. Yeah, I miss a lot. I miss a lot of my old life, and I'll never have it again. That's okay. I'm gonna have new stuff, new memories, new things, and this stuff is hard. And maybe one day I'll be like, man, wasn't it great when I lived in that apartment in Concord? You know, compared to what I've got going on, my busted knees or whatever the hell is going on with me in 10 years, God willing that I live that long, 20 years, whatever. Think back on it. Oh, those were great light days. I really miss the weird weird weather where it's 70 degrees in the morning and then like 30 degrees at night, you know, and the pollinating that would happen and make you snouty every spring, and you know. But anyway, that's all I've got today.